next and last, I guess, in the thank yous, I'd like to thank the supporting entrepreneurs. There's about 60 of you on board today, and it's really great. And I'd like to just take a moment and tell you what you brought to Richmond. We've had almost 100 events. We've had 90 different speakers at 65 different locations. Over 3,000 people have been to one event or more, and total visits have been more than 20,000. And all that's been free to anyone who's interested, thanks to the support of our supporting entrepreneurs. And I wish I could have you stand, but we'll do that again soon. My colleague, Gary, that you usually hear from at this time, is not here today. He said he had taken a terrific tour with our speaker earlier and wanted to thank him for that. And sorry he had to miss this. He has a event today that he can't miss. And before we go on, I'd like to recognize someone that's had really been important to the Richmond historical community. Mrs. Adele Johnson was executive director of the Black History Museum and the Cultural Center here in Richmond. And she passed away last week after a long battle with an illness. Nancy Everhart and I were both had the honor of being her classmates in Leadership Metro Richmond, and along with all of Richmond, we'll miss her. So, all right, now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. I think it's appropriate that our speaker today is director of the Valentine Museum, because the museum has its roots in entrepreneurship. Its major funder was a guy named Man Valentine, who he failed at a literary career, but like a good entrepreneur, he turned to something else. And after the Civil War, he began selling a health tonic around Richmond. It was called Valentine's Meat Juice. I don't know if any of you still use it, but apparently it worked pretty well. He did it all without Amazon or Facebook or YouTube or anything. And with that money, he helped fund what became the Valentine Museum. In 1993, Bill Martin was chosen to protect Mr. Valentine's contribution to, and during his time there, the institution has become known for its successful efforts to expand civic involvement and making the city the institution more relevant to the present and to the future. Under his leadership, the Valentine has diversified and expanded its programs, including the development of 300 themed tours of the city, including a downtown heritage walking trail and the Richmond Liberty Trail. He's overseen campaigns that raise millions for capital improvements to ensure the stability of the institution for the future. And today, the Valentine's prospering, and Bill manages a staff of over 50, bringing much of the contents of Richmond's attic, as it's sometimes called, to visitors. Bill's also active in much more things than just the Valentine. He's on the board of directors of the Richmond Business Council and Leadership Metro Richmond, and he chairs the Richmond Region Museum Directors, chairs the Richmond Region Museum Directors Group, and is a member of Richmond's Mayor's Tourism Commission. He's worked tirelessly with other community groups to promote the city tourism initiatives. And for all of his efforts, he was recognized as a Richmond Person of the Year by the RTD in 2018. And Adele Johnson, who I mentioned earlier, summed up Bill this way. I think it says it all. He said, Bill is a leader. She said, Bill is a leader who's not afraid to step out and tell his story. And that's what he's going to do today. I'd like to introduce Bill Martin and Valentine.
Good morning, guys. Oh gosh, it's really too early. I'm like in COVID time, is this really like 7 o'clock? It's just way too early. It is great to be with you this morning. Talk a little bit about this place we all love. We all love to hate this place that is so complicated, and yet that story that we have is one that is unique, I think, and one that only Richmond can tell because of the broad sweep of history that we have within our region. I will like to, there are always a few warnings that I give before I start this tour, is that the opinions expressed on this tour are not necessarily those of the Valentine. that this is a personal vision of the city. These are things that these are the neighborhoods I love. I know, I can guarantee that there's a story I'm going to miss. There's a place I'm not going to go. And there's something I'm going to say that's probably going to offend. So we're just going to ride this trip together. And I do hope that as we go along, that in the notes that you'll tell some stories yourself that we can add to the tour. And let's just see if I can actually do this, which is a really a crazy thing for me. Look at that. And I think we're ready. This is the route of our tour today, and we'll actually be making this available for you, this entire tour. Once we're done, we'll send copies to everyone when the tour is over. But I'd really like to sort of keep the tour downtown, sort of a quick packet around the center city. Again, certainly there are a lot of places that we are not going to be able to go today.
Want to look at this while we listen?
Stories that we are not going to be able to tell, but where else would we start, guys? We're going to have to start at the Valentine.
What?
You must mute, please, so that we can all hear Bill. Even if you're on your phone, please mute. Pardon me, Bill.
That's okay. The center of the universe, actually, the Valentine. I think the story of this institution is in many ways the story of our city. It's as complicated as you can imagine. One of the things that we've done during the past year as we've been doing research on our institution is actually beginning to see our own connection to this very complicated story of Richmond. What do you do with a story that says that one of your founders was deeply involved in the slave trade? What do you do when you discover as part of your research during COVID? What do you find? What do you do when you suddenly discover that the artist, Edward Valentine, really was one of the creators of the mythology of the lost cause, and that monuments across the city were created by him to establish a particular narrative of Richmond and the South after the Civil War? What do you do with all of that? What do you do with, how do you actually take this rich history of our institution, this family and this city, and how do you begin to say, the Valentine has changed, continues to change, continues to need to change, our city needs to change, but also, more importantly, people need to change as we think about our history and the meaning of all this place. And so that's what the Valentine does through its block of historic buildings, but also through the varieties of programs that it does throughout the city and throughout the year. It's a tough challenge. And I think folks in the room that are involved in history, Janine Bell, I know is here, Alex Nurges, those of us that are working in the cultural sector, this is a very exciting / challenging time. And so let's move out. Let's move out from the Valentine and sort of take a little drive around our campus. You can't tell the story of Richmond, you can't tell the story of America without John Marshall. And there, the John Marshall House right there on the corner. We complain, don't we, about the Supreme Court often? Everything that we know about the Supreme Court was invented by John Marshall. Judicial review, separation of powers, all of those things, not in the Constitution, but the John Marshall Court established the precedents that our Supreme Court still uses today. Really, really essential, important part of the American story. When was the last time, rather than the Civil War, when was the last time we talked about this part of our American history? This period of American history from 1790, when the capital moves to Richmond in 1780, through the 1930s. We don't talk about that period, and yet it is the most interesting for Richmond, and we'll see how that story plays out as we take our drive. I will have to say that there's the ugliest building in Richmond. It's the Public Health and Safety Building. And I'm also happy to say that that building is about to be demolished. in the next 30 days, the street will be reopened and the grid for downtown will be reestablished. You'll be able to stand in the front porch of the Valentine and actually see all the way to the convention center when the street is reopened. It'll be also the new location for the Ronald McDonald House, the Doorways Project, and a variety of other new buildings are in our block. Just to show how much construction is going on, there's an estimated 1.5 billion in new construction going on, from Massey Cancer's treatment center, which is going to be spectacular, to the adult outpatient building, to the building that you see on the left, the new, they're calling it the Wonder Tower, and it's the new Children's Hospital. But as we leave downtown, we actually drive through Navy Hill. And we certainly know the name Navy Hill. But why? Why was it called Navy Hill? Well, it was supposed to be, it was actually, Richmond played a vital role in the War of 1812, a war that we've all forgotten. And yet in Richmond, soldiers went to serve, and Navy Hill was going to be the site of a monument that was not constructed to the naval heroes of the War of 1812. While we didn't get a monument, guess what? We did get street names. And so if you go to Manchester, take a look at all the streets. All the streets in Manchester are named for the heroes, the naval heroes of the War of 1812. Just a little trivia, but we're also going across the bridge and we're going towards Barton Heights and Highland Park. And before this is over, you'll be so tired of cemeteries, but I love cemeteries. And so we just passed the Jewish cemetery. Did you know that in 1800, 1 in every 8 males in Richmond was Jewish? That in fact, because of the statute for religious freedom passed in Richmond in 1786, we had religious freedom in Virginia, unlike any other state, any other of the early states. First government to actually proclaim religious freedom as a central tenet of government. And so Virginia ends up with all kinds of interesting religious practice. Yes, we had Baptists. Oh my gosh, we got Baptists, we got Presbyterians. We ended up with a variety of religious faith because of Virginia's statute of religious freedom. Essentially, if you wanted to work, pay taxes, and support the government, you were welcome in Virginia. But there are other buildings along the way that I think are important indicators of our history. So at the top, you'll see a building that was built as Richmond's almshouse. It's built in the 1850s. It's still there, standing on the hill. I think this is an interesting statement about Richmond's care of its poor, because the building was used up to the Civil War, and then during the Civil War was used as a hospital for soldiers. And then after, this building is still a part of Redevelopment Housing Authority's property, was once the city hospital. One of the biggest discoveries, so much of Richmond's history is hidden in plain sight. And if you look at that little garage, one of the most horrible things that we have done is desecration of African-American cemeteries. And this, I think, is one of the most egregious. Under that gas station is Second African Burial Ground. This is right as the bridge, right as you cross the bridge into Highland Park. Under this, we don't really know how many bodies are here. We know that in the 1930s, that highway projects in this area, knowingly by the city, destroyed the cemetery, cut a highway through it. And one of the most egregious injustices is the city placed the animal control center for the city on top of this ground. So we keep going. We keep going. We keep going. What do we find when we go to Highland Park? Well, I think there's an interesting thing. Again, how do we respond to the needs of our community? Well, we'll see it at the bottom, on the bottom left. You'll see a slide that's of Highland Grove. Highland was actually the site of Dove Court. Doveport was one of the worst of Richmond's public housing projects. But there's something weird about this project. I don't know if it was really done with this master plan. There was going to be a new school, a new community center, all of these things, and none of those things. It's an unrealized promise to this community. But I think even more upsetting to me is the design on these houses. Did you notice? There are no back doors. There are no backyards. Just consider what that might have meant. I'm not, does it talk about the trust level of our community with people who live in these houses, so someone can't go out the back door? Is it discouraging family life and community life? All kinds of things are in this mix when you look at this. Well, it seems beautiful. Design tells us about our perception of the people we hope to live there. Now, I love Highland Park. I just love the story of this neighborhood because it was out of the city until 1910. And Highland Park in Barton Heights, outside of the city, became really sort of the center of Richmond's Italian community. In fact, we just put a sign up in Highland Park, "Welcome to Little Italy," because this neighborhood was the site where many Italians moved when they came to Richmond because they were not really welcome in the city. They came, they built the cathedral, the Sacred Heart, and then were basically told the cathedral is not for you. There was an attempt to go to St. Patrick's Church in Churchill. That was an Irish congregation, and guess what? The Italians were told that was not your place. They tried to go to Holy Cross, which was a German Catholic church in Jackson Ward, and were rejected there, and ended up building their own church in Highland Park, and that's St. Elizabeth's Catholic Church, and that's the church you see at the bottom. We can certainly see that gentrification and neighborhood change is coming to this neighborhood with all of the new businesses along the Brooklyn Park Boulevard, 6 Points, and just an amazing sort of transformation of this neighborhood. A neighborhood's in trouble when you have a tattoo parlor, a coffee shop, and a kombucha place. What the heck is going on? And I think that it's interesting looking in neighborhoods and seeing what neighborhood change looks like. And certainly Brooklyn Park Boulevard, Highland Park, and Barton Heights are changing because this is what they look like when they were built. It was essentially, when we think about Short Pump today, this was Short Pump 1890. Transportation, this new trolley line extended out, and American four-square houses were being built. And there you have it. It looks like Short Pump with no trees. But if you look in the back of the house at the top, boy, were there good gardens being grown. There's a chicken coop, there's grapevines, because this neighborhood, because there are lots of Italians, had an annual wine competition where the priest from St. E's Church would come and judge the wines. I'm suggesting actually that we should bring back the wine festival to Brooklyn Park. But it's also a place where we can discover a lot of stories about our city. And certainly this is an important moment. You would think as a community, this picture would have the prominence that Little Rock has for that community. This is Channel High School. In 1960, it was the first school to be integrated in Richmond. It's Richmond Community High today. But this is a defining moment for the city that we don't see reflected in any of the work that we do in terms of telling our story. And it should have the same place that other stories have in the city. We're moving through, and I'm sorry we're going so fast, we're moving through Barton Heights. But one of the things that I love is looking at churches. And there's First African Baptist Church. It's in Barton Heights. It moves there from downtown. And the history of Baptists, to me, I won't ask for people to confess if they're Baptists, but it is the most interesting story. in Richmond, because Baptists, really, because of the Statute of Religious Freedom, come to Richmond, establish a church on the corner of College and Broad downtown. This church divides over slavery and the role of African Americans in the congregation. The Black congregation remains on that corner in downtown. First Baptist moves a block away, and then both of these congregations, because of changing nature of their congregations, move to the suburbs. This should give you a really interesting notion of something we don't talk about, and that is Barton Heights becomes the center, one of the centers for successful Black business and families. The schools, the churches, the civic and social organizations were reflected also in Churchill, in North Churchill. Communities of Black success, doctors, lawyers. In fact, the first African-American to live in Barton Heights moves in the 1940s, and she's a professor at Virginia Union. So this neighborhood is where, so when we think about Jackson Ward, there's a bigger story to Richmond than Jackson Ward. And I think that looking at these communities, places like Maggie Walker's St. Luke's Gold, which is in Jackson Ward, isolated by I-95. And then below, you'll see the construction of public housing. These are both units in Gilpin Court. Gilpin is certainly the oldest. And one of the weird things that we discovered in a newspaper here was a story, a headline that says, Negroes finally get housing. This was housing built for Richmond's poor community. And guess who gets it first? Soldiers returning from World War II get the housing first before the people that the housing was intended for was able to access. Just an interesting sort of sideline of how we do this. I think we should just pause a moment and just remember Adele. Here at the Black History Museum, this place that over the last 2 years, Adele transformed into this vital center for Richmond, and really an important place for all of us to discover. This building built by, there were many at the time of these militias that were being founded, really more social organizations. This building built by Blacks for Blacks by a Black militia organization. It was just an amazing, amazing tower of strength in this community to show the success of what the Black community was doing in Richmond. But you can see in the photographs, in fact, there's Maggie actually behind the counter at the bank. But the central role that churches and schools play really are an important thing that we often do not talk about, and yet are important pieces of just telling the full Richmond story. But that story also tells this one. This is what it looks like when you destroy a community. We know that 10% of Richmond's African-American community loses their houses with the construction of I-95, and you can see the big bend in the highway with 6 Mount Zion Church there. 6 Mount Zion was actually in the middle of the route for I-95, but was saved. You can also see on the far left of this picture the St. Luke building that we saw earlier. And you can see what this does to a community when we look across the interstate from 6 Mount Zion across the interstate to Gilpin. How this is what we have done over time to divide the community, both geographically and socially and economically. There's some things happening here, and I hope someone can explain some of these things to me, because I just don't get it. We're passing Maggie Walker, and certainly we're going by Virginia Union, this amazing institution emerging out of Lumpkin's jail in Shockoe Bottom, become this important historically Black college. And we end up in, I don't know, Scott's Addition. Can anyone explain Scott's Addition to me? I just don't get it. But I mean, I'm not 12. I mean, I'm not 20. I guess I just don't understand. But it is one of the hot spots for Richmond. Lots of beer, lots of good food, lots of theater, and lots of construction. I will tell you that in Boca, the taco place, is a porn store. And I will just tell you that the Valentine likes to preserve everything. And so we, in our collection, have the porn store sign. I've got 25-cent novelties in my office right now, and please come and visit. We also continue down Arthur Ashe Boulevard to Monument Avenue. And this is certainly a center of lots of conversation today. And what comes next? And how do we deal? What are the opportunities that we see following the social justice protest of last summer? I think that this is a much more complex story than we want to see, because we've done a study, and we can do a separate presentation on monuments, which I think might be a better way to do this at some point. But if we look at the history of monuments after the Civil War, we can see something very interesting happen. So the first two monuments constructed to the Civil War are actually ones that are more abstract and are at burial sites. One at Hollywood Cemetery, 18,000 Confederate burials there. And the other is in Church Hill at Oakwood Cemetery for 17,000. Smaller monument there. And guess what? Even in death, we treat our soldiers differently. Hollywood, the big monument, small monument at Oakwood, because those are the graves of people who died in Chimborazo Hospital that didn't necessarily die on the battlefield. And so you get a different kind of burial depending on how you die in the war. We don't get a lot of monuments for a long time because we have this very progressive period in Virginia called the Readjuster period. And that's a whole different discussion entirely. What does a strange political party composed of Confederate generals, Republicans, and newly freed Blacks look like? It looks like it looks like the Readjuster Party that really runs Virginia for a little over a decade. But 1888 is a critical date. Fitzhugh Lee is elected the governor of Virginia. 1888 is when the first plans for Monument Avenue are established. Those plans are in the collection of the Valentine, and I will tell you that that original plan was only one monument. There were no other monuments in that plan, and those are really the monuments that come after that are owned by the city are in fact afterthoughts or representative of something other than what we think about those early monuments representing sort of the sense of mourning. This is a glorification of a cause through the monuments that are established from 1890 when Lee goes up through the 1920s. These monuments have a very different purpose. And I think that we are now having that opportunity to dig deep into the meaning of the lost cause, Richmond's role in creating that lost cause myth, and understanding that this is not an opportunity, this is not something to run away from, but this is the story that we can help the country in deciphering and unpacking. And I think with VMFA and Virginia Museum of History and Culture and others in this community, this is our opportunity to deconstruct what happened in Richmond, because what happened in Richmond happened in the entire country. And it can explain and help us work through some issues across the country. So what do you have? Alex, you want to talk? I'm sorry, I'm not going to call out Alex. But I mean, this amazing rumors of war sort of added additional context and conversation to our monumental landscape. The Daughters of the Confederacy. Again, when you think about Richmond 1890, I'm going to tell you 1890 is a critical period because who's founded? The Valentine, the Museum of the Confederacy, Commonwealth Club, St. Christopher, St. Catherine's, the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Sons of Confederate Veterans. All of these organizations are established in the 1890s. almost everything our brains think about what Richmond is 1890. And it was this emergence of Jim Crow and racism in the South in some very institutional ways. Can't avoid it. But also wonder about Columbus. Have you ever wondered about why in the heck Columbus is in Richmond? All right, this is easy. Remember those Italians? Well, I tell you what, if you are new to Richmond, and the way that you establish your identity is you put up a monument. And so the Italians and Columbus statues go up all across the country in the 19 teens and 20s, because that's when we had the wave of Italians. That's when the Columbus monument goes up in New York City. And it's because Italians knew what was going to happen. They saw the rise in anti-immigrant sentiment. So this monument goes up just as America shuts down all immigration. Unavoidable. That's what happens. And so if we want to do some parallels between today, we can see that that Richmond has always grown and been more progressive and changed the most when we've had the most immigration. Whether it's if we look at our recent times, the move of Altria and other companies to Richmond, bringing in new ideas, we can go all the way through our history and see that the times when Richmond has moved forward the most are the times when we have had the most amount of immigration into the community. And I think you'd find that in the country too. And then there's the Carillon. Carillon is another amazing monument to World War I. I know a little bit more about this one because this was actually a project of the Valentines. The original statue, there was original kind of traditional monument that was supposed to be there. And the Valentines said, no more glorious soldiers. We want to remember this war and remember the losses, not the heroes, not the generals. And there it is, a simple monument. So we got to keep moving. I know I'm going too long. And if you're going to say, will he ever stop? I think the Carillon is also one of those places that we don't talk about enough. And I think there's some folks from the neighborhood. This is the first intentionally integrated neighborhood in Richmond. This neighborhood was being redlined. They understood what that meant to the community, and they organized against the redlining of this community. We love arts in the park. We all love arts in the park. Why was arts in the park established? To tell this community that this was a great neighborhood and that everyone should come here, and that that this neighborhood was not going to be redlined out of existence by restricting loans and insurance and mortgages. At the top, you'll see the lake at Maymont, two lakes. Why are there two lakes? One for African American, one for whites. I need to go back. And again, one of my favorite shots, and it really doesn't show very well, is the bottom left. Even in death, we have two separate entrances to heaven, just so you know. These are the two entrances to Riverview Cemetery in Mount Calvary. One is for Catholics, because half the cemetery is for Catholics, and the other side, Riverview, is for the rest of us. And all three of these cemeteries actually connect with Hollywood. So even in death, we've got a bunch of different gates to get us to where we're going. I can't decide which one I like the best. We're crossing the river. We saw Tredegar, that amazing spot. One of the biggest transformations going on in the city, and I hope you'll take a drive over, is really what's going on in Manchester and on South Side. This entire part of the city is being transformed by this really amazing, active Latino community. And Karen Stanley, there you are. This is Karen's new neighborhood. If you've not been to Caritas and the new facility there, you need to go right now. But this neighborhood is really transforming itself with lots of new construction, but also with this commitment to serving the folks that are on South Side. So Sacred Heart Center really is this important place for the service of Richmond's Latino community and Spanish-speaking community. We know that the population of Richmond is changing. We can find elementary schools where 90% of the kids in the school system, in that school, are Spanish-speaking. It makes it, for English as a second language, you have to have a lower percentage. So you've got places like Bouchal Middle, where you have 40 to 45% of the school population being Spanish-speaking. So there's a really interesting shift occurring along Jeff Davis Highway and along Hull Street that really are changing the energy of the city, but also bringing us some really amazing, I really like to eat. And I think that in every neighborhood we've gone through, there's amazing, amazing food. So don't go to, make sure that you're, as part of this tour, and you take these routes, stop at a place that you don't know and find some food, because Southside has changed. This is Hull Street, little dirt road. We know that Manchester was not annexed, but this is actually the wrong word. It says annexation. The folks there would say that it was consolidated. Annexation implies it was taken over by the city. That's not what the folks over there would say. They've all voted together to do this. Now, I will tell you that there's some things that the city is not, since 1910 when it happened, we still have some things we need to do, because we guaranteed that there would be sidewalks in Manchester. There are still communities waiting for their sidewalks. The other thing that we know did happen is that part of the annexation agreement increased the number of liquor licenses on South Side. And I'm trying to think what else. There were a couple other, and there was always going to be a pedestrian bridge across the river from downtown. So ever notice that weird pedestrian bridge down the middle of the big bridge going over? That bridge, that pedestrian bridge, is there because it was an agreement in the 1910 consolidation agreement. This is also a place with some interesting stories and challenges, from the mobile home parks along Hull Street and Jeff Davis, really providing important housing and important communities. I think many times we look at this and go, that's a terrible housing, but in fact, it is many of these communities are very strong communities. And how do you support strong communities while also improving housing? I think that that's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing across the city, and certainly in this part of the city. But lots of housing going up in Hillside Court. Many of us are aware of public housing projects around the city. Hillside Court represents a very different animal. It was public housing for Richmond's white community. And then I think that the spot we're looking at, that view from Ann Landing, is one where we begin a different story of the city, and one that I know Janine Bell is here, one that Janine Bell tells so incredibly with her work for the Slave Trail Commission and with the Aloha Folklore Society. This is an amazing place. This is Ann Landing. We know that this was a loading area for enslaved folks that are being sold out of Richmond, downriver from the city. And we're going to go across the river and sort of look at the rest of that story. And here's the rest of that story. This is 15th and Dock Street. And we are looking from the river up. You'll see that there's a series of buildings on the left. We actually believe that at least one of those buildings was directly related to the slave trade. This road, and at the other end, you see in the shadow an old railroad building. That's where Main Street Station is. This particular block in this particular street was the center of the domestic slave trade, the second largest slave trading area in the country, and it's in Richmond, Virginia. Why? Why did this happen? Why is it here? Well, the international trade ends, and Richmond is just becoming a place. Capital has just moved up, and the international trade ends 1809, and Richmond becomes that place for the domestic trade. It is believed that between 350 and 500,000 people are enslaved and brought into North America during the international trade. The number of people that are sold out of Richmond in the years before the Civil War appear to be between 350 and 500,000 people sold out of Richmond. So that's the magnitude of the sales. We know that Richmond had surrounding it breeding farms, because what happens is the Virginia economy, the agricultural economy, begins to collapse as cotton and tobacco wear the soil out. And one of the principal means of making a living for many of Virginia's white community was the sale of their enslaved people. And so from this spot, we know that a large percentage of America's African-American community can find their origins. And their grand boulevards, and this is what we have to mark that event. I think as a community, we have this clearly is the challenge for our story. For instance, this is in the Valentine collection. We have the ledger for Lumpkin's Jail, this place that becomes a place of hope after with the establishment of Virginia Union University. But we also know that within this area, there were businesses established just to serve the trade. So there were retail establishments that just did dry goods clothing to clothe people for sale. We know that there were special markets that were here just to make sure that people were fattened up, essentially, to look good for sale. That this is an area that requires our attention, that tells this story of transportation and trade, of tobacco. It is important to the story and one that we have to tell. And one that as we've seen, has seen significant improvements from the Capitol Trail and Low Line to the Canal Walk. This is a really important part of the city that is beginning to change. This is the farmers market area. Again, one of the earliest farmers market in the Commonwealth. And we can also see the variety of farmers market buildings that have served this area. I love the one in the top right, sort of not your normal view of a farmer's market. I wish we put that one back, but that's, just personal opinion. And as we continue through this area, we see the sort of landscape that calls us to change. There's a parking lot with the site of Lumpkin's Jail. There is one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Jewish burial ground in the state, surrounded by apartments. It's the YMCA building that was built not for residents, but this was for folks that were working in the railroads. What a story we could tell about workers and the work that happened in this area of the city. And what's amazing, we went back to that gas station at the beginning. If you follow this all the way around from Lumpkin's Jail, the Devil's Half Acre, to the burial ground, guess what? That burial ground in Shockoe Bottom connects to the second African on that hill. This history is linked to everything we think about ourselves, and one that we need to look at. We've got to head back. I know that we're getting close, and I don't want us to spend too much time, but Richmond has amazing parks throughout it. There are two amazing shots from Church Hill. I will tell you that we're opening a new exhibition next Wednesday called Breathing Spaces that look at parks and where we recreate and where we have gone to breathe through our history in Richmond, where we've been breathing for the last year, and looking at places that not everyone is allowed. We're looking at pools and cemeteries and all the places that where we go and where we can be together and where we can separate. I live in Church Hill, and what a remarkable place this is. St. John's Church, we love to talk about St. John's Church, don't we? We love that revolution stuff. We love that revolution stuff. We love Patrick Henry saying, give me liberty or give me death. But why do they come to Richmond anyway? So if you look at that photograph, see the little wall that has just one door on it? That's the actual first church. It's a tiny, tiny little building. And why did they come to Richmond? Because there were less than 600 people living here at the time. No one could find them. And so this is a place to go to hide, to have a secret meeting. So I think that we spend a lot of time talking about this, but we don't really talk about this thing that happens after the revolution and the revolutionary ideas that emerge from this city, like in 1800 with Gabriel, taking Patrick Henry's liberty or death and proclaiming death or liberty in one of the earliest of the slave revolts that we see in the South, an important marker in Richmond's history. But we talk about Patrick Henry, we should be at the same breath be talking about Gabriel. Same impulse, same ideas. And so we're going to close by going up Broad Street. I know that we've missed lots of things. We've seen lots of things happening along the street. But the challenge of Broad Street remains. We have challenges that are reflected from last year that tell us and tell us and tell us that as a city, we have greater opportunities to do it right this time. We have the ability to make that we should not be the same place we were. That old Richmond that we used to take that tour of, we should say right now it doesn't exist. And the new tour of Richmond is something we are yet to create. And that new tour of Richmond should be one that reflects who we want to be as a community, where we want to be, and adequately and honestly deals with the history that is ours. You know, we are afraid of our history. If you think about how we promote ourselves, we don't really talk about this difficult stuff. And yet across the South, communities are finding that telling the truth brings people. And Richmond can use our history to heal, to grow, to learn. And I think that that's the opportunity of creating the next tour. Now, I want you to help us because now comes the, and I see Pam. Pam, I've got to make it that I have to do the altar call. So guys, it's been fun being with you today. And we're going to pull our tour to a close. Didn't hit everything today, but I know that on Zoom calls, this is about as much as anybody can take. But please, the Valentine is totally supported by private support. There's a very little tiny piece of city money, but we have to raise money to make all this happen every year. So go to our website, thevalentine.org, and send cash. I've done now our advancement people have said that I've done my job, but it's really been sort of fun being with you. I hope that we've gone to a neighborhood maybe you've not been, maybe you've learned about a neighborhood you didn't know about, that you found the theme. Because I mean, we've really just sort of brushed on so many things. We didn't go to the West End. We didn't go really to Northside much because I love this core around the city. And I think that within walking distance of our capital, you can find an American story. So guys, thanks.
Thank you, Bill. Nancy, do you have some questions?
I do. I just really, I want to express so many folks who were so appreciative of this. Just a couple of comments, Bill, so that you know the inspiration you caused. Daphne Smith said, love the ties to national and global history and thoughtful approach to Richmond's complicated history. Many are so grateful for the truth telling that you're bringing. I had a great question about what's the right tour for an old resident or the new visitor, and I think you hit on that at the very end. But if someone did have a half a day in town, what in addition to the Valentine would you recommend?
Well, I'm going to be in so much trouble. Okay, so I would take a walk on Broad Street and just sort of begin to see what's happening on Broad. You got a half day or a full day?
You pick.
I'm going to do a whole day because you have to kind of go to the Capitol. You have to come to the Valentine. I would definitely add, if you're trying to discover the city and the history, I would definitely maybe take a walk at Maymont. I would stop by VMFA and Virginia Museum of History and Culture, sort of get the history, and Black History Museum. If you're a history person, you can do the history museums, and you can do all the history museums in a day, and then sort of throw in a wild card, like the John Marshall House, or, we haven't really talked about the American Civil War Museum, but I think there are a whole, if you just want to do a day of history, that's easy. If you want to do a day of art, that's a whole nother thing. If you want to do a day of gardens, we didn't really talk about the incredible gardens at Agecroft and Maymont, that there are enough, if you just like, and Lewis Skinner Botanical Garden, and so that again, you can slice it any way you want to, but I think a half day has to be sort of diving into why the heck this place is here and understanding, one, what kind of philanthropy generated the wealth to create these institutions, and how did we get here, and understanding what we hope for our city for the future. I think a lot of our institutions can help do that.
Great. And then one final question, Bill, you mentioned, and I think you got a lot of people on this in this meeting excited about the notion of Richmond in its deconstruction of our history being a real center for folks to really understand our times and our past. And is that like a mission you're on where you want to be the Pied Piper for us, or how do you see that happening?
I am not the Pied Piper. We know that ended badly. So I think that as a community, we need to begin to unite around that history, and our institutions that we've talked about and are ready to do that. I think that we, again, have to reinvent it in a Richmond way. This notion that there needs to be a traditional leadership or whatever, I think we need to do this in a uniquely Richmond way. And I'm not sure, that's why this group is, you're the entrepreneur group, you're the creative group. Let's see, how can Richmond do this differently? Because if we don't do it, we've lost the biggest opportunity. And I think I'm gonna get in serious trouble. But Nancy, you and I talked earlier. I just think that we love to go after these shiny objects, like a casino, like a thing, when we have absolutely all the resources to create a unique place that doesn't need, though we have our own history, culture, amazing institutions, from art museums to history museums to science museums, to galleries, to the work that's being done with organizations, that we have enough unique resources that we don't need to replicate what somebody else is doing to be successful. And I think we always do that. We try to think that we are, as we talked earlier, that Richmond has one of the low, and it's improving. But I do think that Richmonders, particularly those old people like me, we have the lowest self-esteem for our city. We need therapy for that low self-esteem because there's no reason for it. We have tough things to talk about. We have tough therapy issues. that we need to deal with. But I think of doing that therapy in public will help all of us and can help the country.
Thank you very much, Bill. I think we're up to about to the end of our time now. I thought of something that I mentioned, the LMR, Leadership Metro Richmond. During that time, there was a gentleman from Signet Bank named Mac McDonald there. And he ended a speech one day by saying, the best advice I can give you is to take a different way home every day. And he said that Richmond's got these wonderful neighborhoods. Just when you're going home from work, just drive in a different neighborhood and look around and learn about it. And that's what we've tried to do a little bit today. And hopefully we'll all be inspired to do it in the future. We have some more questions that have come in, and we'll send some of those to you maybe, and we can add something.
Yeah, we can answer some questions offline, and then particularly those folks that remember to go to the valentine.org.
You want to repeat that? I think it was a little disrupted.
And sign up for our newsletter.
Bill,
Sign for our newsletter and really kind of connect. One more time, thevalentine.org. And it would be, how many times would you like for me to read? And make sure you sign up for your newsletter at thevalentine.org. Bye, guys.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, folks, we will see you on May 25th. The video will be up soon, and thank you again to everyone that joined us today. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you soon. So long.
Hey, Nancy,
Yes,
was that okay?
it was marvelous. Oh my gosh, Bill. So I don't know that you could have more impact than I already thought you were, but every day I just think you add to it. Thank you so much.
Well, and thanks for inviting me. And let's when we go back to having real meetings, let's try to figure a way to do something downtown. I think we could probably find us maybe in the new children's hospital.
Mm-hmm. And Becky Massey has invited us down her way some.
She was on.
I'm sure Becky has. So I think we could do something.
Yeah.
I think where there's going to be space. I bet there'll be space for us to do something in the new Massey cancer treatment areas or children's. There are a lot of big meeting spaces that are developing. So
we've had a couple of meetings in there. We've met at the Holocaust Museum once. We met at the city library, at the state library once. We met over at the on Church Hill in the Robinson Theater. I think I've got that right? The Robinson Theater, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think I think Becky Massey, between Becky Massey and we can find a place on the VCU health campus to do something and make it really interesting. I mean, we may be able to get some folks into surgical suites and there are some really interesting things that the hospital is doing now. And with the children's, they've got this big space that is a rooftop situation. That has the perfect view of the Capitol. So,
All right.
Great idea, and it's recorded, so we have it.
Is that Becky?
Becky was on, but I think she left right before we mentioned her name.
Okay, well, that's of course she did. All right, guys. See ya.
See you.
All right. So long, folks.